Hello, everyone. This is Congressman Alex Mooney. Thank you for joining our important discussion, telephone, town hall, or just telephone discussion. If you're on this call, then you live in one of the 17 beautiful counties I represent across the 2nd District of West Virginia. The main reason for this call with leaders in the faith community is that two weeks ago on one of my telephone town halls, a pastor asked if churches and religious groups would qualify for these forgivable loans that are part of the Paycheck Protection Program, part of the Coronavirus Aid Relief Package. And the gentleman on the line, who was with the Small Business Administration of West Virginia from Clarksburg, responded that no, religious groups did not qualify based on the code of law. I did not like that answer, and nor did a lot of folks, and we entered into a couple weeks of letter writing campaigns, and we're very thankful that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, got his department to issue some new regulations that would allow faith-based organizations to take advantage of this program. So this conversation today is with leaders from faith-based organizations across the district to talk about the program as part of this CARES Act, which was just passed barely over a week ago. We've been contacted by church leaders asking whether they qualify. As I mentioned, we sent a letter to the SBA, Small Business Administration, Secretary Carranza, specifically asking that nonprofits and religiously affiliated organizations fully benefit from the Paycheck Protection Program. This program allows small businesses to obtain grants or forgivable loans to cover payroll costs and most mortgage interest, rent, and utility costs. Given the impact that coronavirus has had on your faith-based organizations, we want to hear from you. This is interactive, and you may press *3 on your phone at any time. Press *3 to get into the question queue to ask a question to me or our special guest, Congressman Mike Johnson from Louisiana, who I'll introduce in a minute. I remain in continuous contact with the Trump administration about the virus response. Faced with this virus, these coming weeks will be a challenge for us in West Virginia and all the United States. While it has been a time of uncertainty, the pandemic has proven the strength of our country, the power of prayer, the power of our communities, the ability of churches to help, and the compassion of all of our people. Again, press *3. We would like to hear from you about any detailed questions you have or overall questions. *3 to get into the question queue. One of my staff will say hello to you and put you online in the question queue here. But today I'm proud to introduce our distinguished guest and my good friend, Representative Mike Johnson, who represents the 4th District of Louisiana. Mike was elected in 2016, 2 years after I was elected in 2016. I was elected in 2014. It was great to welcome him to the Congress and Republican Conference, and specifically, he serves on the House Judiciary Committee, where he's a ranking member of one of the subcommittees, which is a subcommittee on Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. Just last year, for the 116th Congress, Mike Johnson was elected by his colleagues, like me, to serve as chairman of the Republican Study Committee, which is the largest caucus of conservatives in Congress. Previous chairmen include Vice President Mike Pence. Mike is a dedicated husband and father of 4. His children range in ages from 18 to 9 years old. And specifically, Mike Johnson has served he served for many years as the senior attorney for Alliance Defending Freedom, and he was a media spokesman for many of America's largest religious liberty organizations. So he's a lawyer. He's got his Juris Doctorate from the Paul Herbert Law Center at Louisiana State University. Received that in 1998, where he was class president and president of the Christian Legal Society. And on our calls with members of Congress, we've had calls basically every day, whether it's with the committee or all members of Congress and Republican members of Congress. Mike Johnson has been all over this issue to make sure religious groups, churches are able to fully participate as equal, having equal opportunities as everyone else. They're on the front line. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Johnson to say hello, and we have a few questions in the queue coming in, but let Mike make some introductory remarks, and then we'll go to the questions. So, Congressman Johnson, thanks so much. Go ahead.
Alex, thanks so much. And let me just tell everybody on the call that you've got a great member of Congress, and I know y'all all know that. But Alex is one of the hardest working guys on the Hill, and he's also one of the smartest. And he's a principled man of the people. So you're just very well represented. And when he asked me to join on, I was delighted to do it. I'm pretty busy. I'm down in Louisiana. We are one of the hot zones for the coronavirus pandemic, as you've seen on the news. And next to New York, I think we've got probably the worst problem here. And our pastors are on the front lines of this crisis, just as all of you are. I mean, people are really suffering right now, and emotionally, as well as financially and economically, and in every way. And I was on a call with about 600 pastors yesterday, and we had a great fellowship on the phone. And one of them said, "You know what? The best thing about this is it's a great time to be alive if you have the answers, and you all have the eternal answers, and that's what people increasingly are going to be looking for." So we give thanks to God for that opportunity that's presented for the gospel, and I know you will all be very involved in all that. Let's talk about the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. Two big features. One is the income for American families. Everyone's going to get a check here shortly if they're a lower or middle income earner, and you know all about that, I'm sure. But the small business assistance component of that act has gotten a lot of attention, and Alex did a great job providing you an overview of how far we've come just in the last week. Some of this has been changing by the day, by the hour, even over the weekend. But by God's grace, we were able to get some of these very important preliminary questions answered. And the first one was, would churches and nonprofits be able to participate in this? The reason the SBA director gave that other answer last week in that town hall call that Alex was having is because prior to this change in the law, he was right. The churches were never able to access the Small Business Administration's loans. It was always for other sectors of the economy, for-profit small businesses, but never churches like ours. And so when Congress passed this act, we were very intentional about wanting to include churches, and we had to get that specified on the back end of it to ensure that there was no discrimination. I mean, what we all know is that churches run very much like little businesses, really. I mean, we have a spiritual component, but we operate on tithes and offerings and the income of the church in that way. And when the government makes an extraordinary order that no one can gather for church, it creates a real hardship. And so the intention of Congress here was to make sure that the churches would have the same access as everyone else who are similarly situated and in a real bind here due to no fault of their own. So that's the rationale behind it, and that's why we've gotten clarified now, thankfully, that churches are included. The second question that came up almost immediately is does that mean all churches? And what the concern was is that initially a couple of churches in my district, for example, tried to fill out the application. They went to their local bankers and lenders, as we advised everybody to do, to start the process. And they were immediately told that if they did not have a tax-exempt determination letter certifying them to be an officially recognized 501c3 by the IRS, that they would not, they would not be able to participate and file an application. So we had to go back and get that clarified as well. We did that in bipartisan fashion, and thankfully, I'm delighted to tell you over the weekend, the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Mnuchin, and the Small Business Administrator and Labor Secretary, everyone, and even the President tweeted about it over the weekend, that yes, this means all churches. And so they have eliminated the necessity of having that formal designation as a C3. As you all probably know, under current tax law, under the Internal Revenue Code, churches are deemed to be nonprofits, and there's never been a legal requirement that you go through that costly, time-consuming process of actually getting a designation letter from the IRS. And so many, particularly smaller churches, a lot of non-denominational independent churches have never done that, but that is not a hindrance here now. So I'm delighted to tell you that all churches have equal participation, whether you got that letter or not. It's not necessary now. The third question that came up that we got answered is about religious freedom. And I know all of you think like Alex and I do. We're limited government folks. We believe that God ordained civil government to maintain order, but it's got a very limited scope of authority and what it's supposed to do. But we know under Romans 13 and other scriptures that we're supposed to be obedient and cooperative with the civil authority, and that's part of how order is maintained in a fallen world, right? But we also know we have a healthy skepticism of government, and with government funding, almost always comes strings attached, right? There are limitations and guidelines and regulations and all that kind of thing. So we had to be very deliberate to make sure that there would be no strings attached if a church avails itself of these funds. And so we're delighted to tell you that in the interim final rule that was published on Thursday night before this program officially began last Friday morning, at page 27 in that rule, there is specific language that says you don't have to worry about that. And I'll just read you one sentence of it. It says, quote, all loans guaranteed by the SBA pursuant to the CARES Act will be made consistent with constitutional, statutory, and regulatory protections for religious liberty, including the First Amendment to the Constitution, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and the SBA regulations. And so what that means to laypersons, and you can explain to your deacons or anyone else who has concern about this, is no, you've gotten clarification straight from members of Congress that you don't have, those normal concerns don't apply here. In the language of the regulation and the rule here, it says that there is no strings attached. So in other words, they can't come in and tell you who to hire or, change what you say from the pulpit or any of that kind of stuff. We don't have to worry about that. And so that has been a great, given a lot of peace of mind, I think, to a lot of our houses of worship and our pastors who are out on the front lines of this thing. So happy to yield to questions. I'm sure I can anticipate a lot of them. I told Alex before this call, I think 30 or so pastors on this call. I think I've now done this with about closing in on about 2,000 pastors in the last 4 or 5 days on conference calls like this all around the country. So delighted to help and answer questions if we can, and I'll yield back, Alex.
Okay, Mike, let me start off with 2 questions. I'm going to wrap 2 together that's in the queue. One is a simple one. How does one contact the SBA? Is that easy one to answer?
Yeah, easy question. So what we're recommending and what the SBA and the Secretary of Treasury have said, the President have encouraged us to do, is to have you go, instead of contacting the SBA, because they're totally overwhelmed, as you can imagine, with all this new volume right now. By way of reference, they normally process about 60,000 small business loans in a year. They're expected to do millions now, kind of almost in this overnight fashion. And so if you call the SBA, you're likely to be on hold for a very long time, and they may or may not get right back to you. So what they've said is the best route is to go to your local lenders, your community banks, who you normally do your church banking with or even your individual banking with, because they'll know you, they'll know your history, and it will short circuit the process for you. It'll make it faster. And so what you want to do is contact them. If you're not sure if your local bank or credit union or whoever you do your banking with, if you're not sure that they are participating in the SBA program, you can call them directly and ask them that question. Most of them are, or they're getting online now. Or you can go to the website, which is sba.gov, and they've got a list that they're constantly updating of lenders in your area who will be participating. That's the best route. That's the quickest and most efficient thing, and so you don't need to contact the SBA itself.
All right, Reverend Derek Biondi, are you with us, Reverend?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. And anyone press *3 to get in the question queue. If you want to ask a question, *3 to get in the question queue. Reverend Derek, you're on. Thank you.
So one of the things that concerns me is when I hear language of a loan, businesses ideally have a profit margin that they, moving forward with that profit margin, they can pay back their loans. Being a church, though, we don't tend to have a profit margin. We tend to, spend what we have on the ministries that we're called to do. And so one of the greatest concerns I have is, are we taking a loan out to prolong our life now only to bite us later, which is where that language of forgivable loan, or Representative Mooney even used the language of grants today. I just wanted to get some clarification on that because it'd be really troublesome to get through this very trying period only to just be overwhelmed by the financial implications when we resume normal worship, whenever that day may be.
Yeah, that's a great question, Alex. You want me to take that? Look, as long as you're following the rules on the loan, then it will convert to a grant. It'll be a gift from the government. It's hard for me to even say that without pausing, but that's what it will be. Okay. And so, Pastor, you're asking a great question. It's an important one. If you use the loan for its intended purposes, and that means that as long as you use 75% or more of the loan proceeds for your payroll expenses, then it will be forgiven on the back end. The rest of it you can use for things like rent or mortgage interest payments, utilities, things like that, your normal cost of operation. But the idea is, as the namesake implies, the payroll protection program, is that Congress, the idea behind this and the rationale makes sense when you think about it. We want to keep people attached to their employer, and in the ministry and church world, we want staff to stay connected to their church, because on the back end of the pandemic, when by God's grace we start to reignite the U.S. economy and dig out of this hole that we're all in now, we're going to need people connected to their employers. That's the only way we're going to rebound. And so that's why this extraordinary measure was taken. So we wanted the money to be spent for payroll so that it will help bridge the gap for this 8-week period. We hope it's no more than that, to kind of get people over that hump. So as long as you're using the lion's share of it for the payroll, then you're going to be fine. Now the follow-up question is, what happens in the extraordinary circumstance where I have to spend more on these other expenses and less on the payroll? What if I only spend 50% on payroll? Well, the way this is designed is there'll be a lesser portion of the loan that converts to a grant. You'll have to pay back whatever that difference is. But even then, the terms are very favorable. It's only a 1% interest rate, which is almost unheard of, and it's a 2-year maturity on the loan. So you could never borrow money like that anywhere else under any circumstance, I don't think, without collateral and everything else. Yeah. So so that's the thing. As long as you're using it on, just keep in mind keeping it on, paying for personnel, then you should be safe. And by the way, another question that comes up immediately is, well, how large can my church's loan be? And the rule is that the loans can be for up to 2 months of your average monthly payroll cost, plus an additional 25% of that amount. And they determine that by looking at the last year, and your lender will give you the details on it, but they'll look at your records of payroll and your tax returns or whatever, and they'll determine that, and then that's how they come up with the amount. The amount is subject to a $10 million cap, which is way beyond the scope of what most of our churches need. But
yeah, we're not going to get anywhere near that.
You're not going to hit the cap. So, and then the payroll costs are capped at $100,000 annualized for each employee. So, in the situation where you have a senior staffer or a senior pastor who makes, let's say, $125,000 a year, whatever it is, it will only go up to that $100,000 limit. But really, that's the only limitations on it, and so you have a lot of freedom to use it as you need, just to bridge this gap.
So just to clarify, if you don't mind, just taking what you said with me, as long as 75% is used in payroll, and in our church, payroll actually is the largest expense, so that works perfectly. As long as we spend that 75% on that, we can spend the 25% on other operating costs. And then at the end of this time, it goes from being a loan to a grant. It only stays a true loan if we don't use it for payroll, and that's when we have to pay it back for that 1% interest rate over 2 years. Did I get that correct?
Yeah, that's a good summary. And there's some nuances if you want to get deep in the weeds, and there are specific circumstances. Like, for example, your loan forgiveness is reduced a bit if you decrease your number of full-time employees. In a scenario where you have to do that. If there's if your loan forgiveness can be reduced if you decrease salaries and wages by more than 25% for any employee that made less than $100,000 in 2019. There's some nuances, but as you said, the summary you said, I think, is very accurate. As long as you just kind of maintain your status quo and spend that on your employee expenses, help them kind of stay whole and bridge the gap for this period, then that's going to be a gift from the government, as crazy as that sounds.
And I want to thank you because the timing on this is perfect. All the United Methodist pastors of West Virginia will be meeting today at 6:30 p.m. to discuss this exactly. And this information is incredibly pertinent and might actually be new information. So I just want to thank you so very, very much for taking the time.
You're welcome,
thank
Reverend.
you. And
yep.
Alex, I know you're going to give them your website, but
yeah.
I'll say mine too. Mine is mikejohnson.house.gov, mikejohnson.house.gov. And what we've done there, I know Alex's is the same, and you can go to his, but if you go to that page, the first thing you see is the coronavirus updates, and then we have a page that just has hot links of all the FAQ documents and the step-by-step and all that. So some of those resources, I think, would be very helpful to you. And Alex, what's your website?
There's not as many Moonies in Congress, so I'm just Mooney, mooney.house.gov.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I wish I had a cool
More
name.
Johnsons than Moonies. All right. We have several other people in the queue, Mike, so I think we'll move on. But Reverend, thank you, and I hope everyone got a lot of information out of that. Let's go ahead to the next. We have Pastor from Spencer, Pastor Mark Wood. Are you with us? Oh, let's see here. We're trying to click live on this. Oh, here we go. Is that on? Pastor Wood, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead. All right, you're on. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My question deals with the changes that have been made that make churches eligible to participate in the CARE Act. How is that being relayed to the banking institutions? I went to our banker today and was told that we don't qualify.
Yeah, they're working on those old assumptions, I think, and we've heard that a couple of times. And so, what you need to do is, with grace and respect, as I know you all will, is just you could take them straight to Alex's webpage or mine, or straight to the SBA, and we have all the. And in their defense, some of this was produced even over the weekend, so it's still fresh off the printer, so to speak. But the SBA has written it right into the interim rule. It's just black and white letter of the law there, and the president tweeted about it over the weekend. I mean, it's pretty widely known now that the old rules don't apply. So their instinct is correct, because they never have been allowed to do this before, but now they are. And we got plenty of documentation that you can show them if they have any question about it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have in front of me the final rule. I think, Mike, you said it was issued Thursday night or something like that, right? The final rule
Thursday night.
From the federal government. So, I mean, it looks like it's a 30-ish page document. So somebody with some legal sense at the bank is going to have to look at that. But they're a little slow in receiving that information, because they definitely do qualify. So, Pastor Wood,
and you can take them right to page 27. Is some real concise language there, where it has even the specification about the protections for religious liberty, and it specifically speaks to religious corporations, associations, educational institutions, or societies. I mean, it couldn't be any more clear. So.
Are there other things you have to qualify? Like, is it for payroll? It's for payroll, right, Pastor Wood? I mean, you're using this for payroll mostly?
Yes, correct. Yes.
All right, so there's no restriction there. And then, are there other things they have to show? Do they have to show anything else, Congressman Johnson, aside from the payroll? I mean, could they be saying he doesn't qualify for other reasons?
No, I think it's in every case I've seen so far, Alex. It's just the banker's just misinformed. They just don't have these latest developments, So
right.
I think you can help them get that corrected.
It was the SBA doesn't work with churches.
Yeah,
that was the explanation given. So, but he said he would
and in the past they were right.
further into it. So.
Yeah, that was the case right up until late Thursday night when Thursday night this new rule came out for this case. So they just don't have the information. Hey, Pastor, if there's any more problems with that tomorrow, go ahead and call my office. We can help get a hold of that particular bank and clarify.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Pastor. Let's go ahead to the next one. And again, if you have a question, it's *3 to get in the question queue. We do have several questions here, and I'm probably similar questions, but if you have something that hasn't been addressed and you have a question, just press *3 to get to the question queue and talk live on the line with me. All right, so we have, is it Chad Cobb?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my question is, currently we have enough cash on hand to kind of bridge this gap between now and June. But presuming that the economic impact lasts longer than this acute medical impact, is it now or never? Do we think that there may be another stimulus package in July where this might be more pertinent for us? But like you said, we're kind of a quote-unquote small business, but we are definitely on the lagging end of that. As the layoffs begin to increase, then the giving to the church will decrease proportionally as well. So that's my main question.
Alex, let me say, I look. This has made my advice to all the. I did religious liberty work for a long time, and I have a lot of close associations with a lot of pastors and networks and like that around the country. And I've told all the people that know and trust me that, I mean, it is a loan, but as we said, it converts to a grant. It's a gift from the federal government. The SBA and Treasury, the reason it took several days to sort all this out is because they had to be very careful to prevent against fraud. You'll have a lot of people, of course, who will try to game the system, and even in the nonprofit sector, we know already that some people have gone to their basement and suddenly created a church, quote unquote, or a ministry so that they can try to get money, right? So all that's going to happen. But the people on this call and the people we're dealing with, you're always going to operate in good faith because you know you have to answer to the Lord, and so here's my concern for you and all of our folks is that you're going to be very conscientious about it. You're going to be very prayerful about it, and you're never going to go. Your instinct is going to be to not take money unless you absolutely need it. The problem in this scenario, this unusual circumstance we find ourselves in, is that it's not an infinite amount of money. So Congress only appropriated. It sounds crazy to say only when we're talking about these numbers, but $349 billion. We were told on a conference call last night that amount may run out within 6 days because there's such a huge rush for a demand for this. And so what I've been encouraging churches to do is if they foresee a need, and even if they think the need may become more acute in the coming weeks, and I would tell you from what we can tell and estimate, it probably will, because even when the stay-at-home orders are dissolved and the economy, so to speak, opens back up, we're going to be in totally uncharted waters. I mean, you're going to have high levels of unemployment. Hopefully this is not true, but this is what's expected. For a while, people, you would anticipate that tithes and offerings are going to go down for a while before it rebounds. So you have to plan accordingly. So what I would say, all that is to say, my advice to pastors is if you think there's going to be need, go ahead and do this. Don't delay, because you want to be able to get in line for that. There is talk. I was on a conference call an hour ago. There's talk about a new, what we would call phase 4, where this engine would be refueled, so to speak, where there'd be a targeted new appropriation just for the Paycheck Protection Program and not all this other, big ticket, big government stuff. But we're going to have a real battle on our hands to do just that. And so there's just no certainty about when and if and to what extent it will be refueled. The latest development on that is there's a bill pending in the Senate right now that I think they've either dropped or they're about to, that would try to target maybe putting another $300 or $400 billion into this fund, and it would go by unanimous consent in the Senate and come to the House for the same purpose. But there's just no guarantees on any of that. So I would just say, at an abundance of caution, if you want to calculate what you would need and go ahead and put the application in, because here's the thing, if you receive the funding and you don't use it or don't need it, you can always, of course, turn it right back into the government. No harm, no foul, right? But a lot of people are not going to be inclined to do that. But I know our houses of faith are going to operate in good faith because at the end of the day, we're going to be fair in weights and measures. So I hope that helps. It's each church has to make its own determination, but you're asking the right question.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a fault. On our end of things, as we talked about it as a board, the concern that we had, like you mentioned there, that there's a limited pot. And if our estimation of our immediate need is less than, Main Street down the road, we didn't feel like we could enter into those waters and rob someone else of the same opportunity. But
I hear you. That's
why we were kind of leaning towards punting. If the need comes up later, maybe there's something else there. But
well, look, here's the other thing. What you and I know is God will honor that. He will. I know He will, and He'll protect you and the church for having made a decision like that. I believe that. So, at the end of the day, it's a matter of conscience and whatever the Lord leads y'all to do.
Correct. Yep. Well, I appreciate the work you guys are doing.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. We'll just go right to the next one here. We have several more in line. We'll try to get to them all, and we'll wrap it up before 5. But Nathan Kane's on the line. Nathan, go ahead.
Yes. So I'm looking at it from my church's perspective, and the majority of their compensation to me is based upon housing allowance, just because they're not paying me a great deal. And I know many ministers have a portion of their compensation package listed as housing allowance. Does that housing allowance actually get included in the payroll numbers when you're requesting an amount on this loan?
Great question, and I think the answer is yes. And I've got a staffer on here as well who can speak up if I'm saying this wrong. But your lender can clarify that more because they're going to have the detailed rule in front of them. But I can tell you the intention of Congress was to keep people whole and to keep kind of the status quo of however payroll is handled. So, for example, by being able to include like the group healthcare benefits as a legitimate cost of this, that's an acceptable use of it. The question is that calculated in that 75% threshold a payroll cost, or is that included as a separate payment or allocation? My gut tells me, my instinct is that it, under those circumstances that you described, it could be part of the regular payroll, but you would want to talk that through with your lender on the front end and make sure you got that clarified. So. I'll try to, as we're talking, I'll go through, there's that 30-page rule. I'll try to see where I can find that provision, but, and I may have a staffer who'll jump in here and tell us, but I think my gut tells me that it would be okay, but we want to verify that with your lender.
Yeah, the reason I asked is just because I know right now my lender doesn't have that answer.
Yeah, okay, well, and that's not too big of a surprise either, because they're all learning this as we go as well. Let me, you know what, if you'll give Alex your number after the call, I'll circle back with you and give you a specific answer on that one.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Sure.
All right, and we're in the process of putting up that 30-page of final rule from the Department of Small Business Administration, so you can print that out and show it to your bank straight away. Let's see. Let's go ahead to Reverend Jacob Pack. Go ahead, Reverend.
Yeah, my church operates off of volunteerism. Myself and my staff are all volunteers. Yet we do have certain expenses. If I approach the SBA to help to bridge those expenses during this time, am I right in assuming that none of that would be forgivable? It would just be a low-interest loan?
I think that's right, because if you think about it, without the record of payroll expenses, the thing would just be wide open for fraud, right? So they have to have some sort of record of past practice on that. And so, yeah, I think that's right. Now, it's a 1% loan with a 2-year maturity. So I mean, you can't do better than that anywhere. But yeah, I think that's right. I think it would probably be a loan under those circumstances, and not a grant.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Right. Let's go one. Pastor or Stacy Wilson. Stacy, if you're with us, go ahead.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and for the information shared. For the federal pandemic unemployment compensation provided by the CARES Act, for eligible unemployment claimants to include gig workers, independent contractors, temporary workers, those who are self-employed, daycare workers, hair care workers, and freelancers. I'm just interested in learning. I know that this application will open at the end of the week, but if you can give some information in regard to how it will be rolled out and how persons can participate.
Yeah, so that's another. Sure, it's a separate component of the CARES Act, but a really important one is that we've expanded, unemployment benefits across the country. Now, every state is tasked with implementing that and rolling it out, and some have done it a little faster than others, and I'm not sure where exactly in the process your state is, but I'm sure it's imminent if it hasn't begun already. But the basis of it is that it's whatever the normal maximum unemployment would be in that state. So, for example, in my state, Louisiana, you can get up to $247 a week. So what the CARES Act does now is it allows eligible workers to receive an extra $600 per week on top of that. And so now it's temporary because it expires at the end of July, but it'll be a big boost for a lot of folks who are unemployed due to no fault of their own. And so it's meant to be very broad in its application. It's supposed to cover anybody who's unemployed or even partly unemployed or can't work for a wide variety of coronavirus-related reasons. They're likely to receive those benefits. But again, it'll be administered by each state's unemployment office, and so they'll have more of the details about that. So some of the questions that come up about that is, what if I don't have the coronavirus but my child's school has been shut down. So am I eligible then because I need to stay home and take care of my child? So if the answer is if you rely on a school or a daycare or some other facility to care for your child and so that you can work, and that facility has been shut down because of the coronavirus, then you are effectively now unemployed, and that's a virus-related situation, and so you're eligible for unemployment. So if you have a legitimate, valid reason tied to that. Now, what Congress did not intend is for somebody to just say, you know what, it's a great time for me to quit my job because I can get another $600, right? So that's the kind of situation where, fraud would be rampant, and so the government's going to be watching that very closely, and I suspect a lot of people are going to be prosecuted on the other side of this. But good faith scenarios like that's what Congress intended to cover, and I think there'll be a lot of relief coming that way for a lot of people.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just had one other question, and it was around grants to feed people in West Virginia.
Yep.
If you could share any resources that faith-based institutions could share with our congregations. Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, Alex, I know you probably talked a lot about this, but that community service block grant is another part of the CARES Act, and that's an additional $1 billion that Congress has set aside to go to the states so they can partner with their local community organizations, and these are for efforts to combat, poverty and homelessness and services addressing unemployment and education, nutrition, health, that kind of thing. So, of course, our churches and our religious organizations are deeply involved in a lot of that, so they'll have access to those grants, and that's being handled through the local governmental entities. Some of them are working through how they're going to do that right now, but that's kind of a note or a notice to faith-based providers who do a lot of that work to be contacting those local officials to figure out how you can take advantage of that opportunity as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. So community service block grants are like other grants. It goes to the state, and the state decides how to process the grant. And I just want to thank everyone on the call. We'll take one more question here, but everyone, the folks in the religious community, faith-based organizations and churches are on the front lines of this, keeping people fed, keeping people spiritually and nutritionally their needs met and through their concerns. So thank you for what you do. I think it's very, very important. You're on the front line. So let's go to Pastor Basham from Milton. Pastor, you with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks for your time, everybody. One quick note on the housing allowance. I'm part of the Acts 29 network, which is a global church planting network, and they had a team researching it. Their official consensus was that it was not addressed. However, they did recommend that housing allowance be treated as payroll because it was a necessary expenditure of the church. So it was necessary to spend it to actually keep going. So for what it's worth, they couldn't find any definitive, but that was their kind of reasoning and advice to our churches. My question was on incentive for banks. We work with a small community bank that frankly just doesn't do anything with the SBA, period. And so they have been very reluctant to grant us the loan, not because we're a church, but because they don't do anything with the SBA. So we went to another bank, and we were denied there because we don't bank with them. And so they said, go to the bank that you bank with. And so they're researching it. They say, we applied on Friday, and so they say they're looking into it. Is there any incentives for banks, particularly those that don't normally do SBA loans?
Well, I would tell you the experience. Thanks for answering that first question. That helps me, and I don't feel so stupid because it's not there. You're right. But that's why these calls are so valuable, y'all, because that gives me, Alex and I, one more thing to take back to the SBA and say, hey, maybe this wasn't anticipated, but let's get some clarity on it. So we'll work on that. But great contribution there to the call. And on your other issue about the community banks, my experience has been that most of our community bankers were really anxious to dive in and assist on this, especially when all this initially came up, because this is what really a community bank is made for, right? The local lenders, this is why they're in business. They want to help. They want to do their part to help their customers and their community and the American economy. And now that said, when initially this was all being discussed, there was talk of interest rates being low at like 5% on the loan and that kind of thing. Then they came back and the SBA just dropped a bomb on all the community lenders who were getting all their ducks in a row to do this. And they said, oh, well, now the interest rate is 0.5%. That was like on Wednesday of last week. And then that sent panic through the banking community because that's actually more than their cost of lending. So they would actually be taking a hit on it. And so the SBA and Treasury realized that, and then they adjusted it, and that's where they came up with the final rule of the 1% interest rate. But the problem for a lot of the smaller banks that are not as well capitalized as the larger institutions is that that 1% interest rate is so low, it barely covers their own cost of borrowing, because the way it works is a small bank has to go to a larger lender sometimes to get the money so that they can have liquidity to be able to loan it out. And so it took a lot of the financial incentive out of it, frankly, for some of the smaller banks. But what I would say to that local banker is, gee whiz, I mean, you're a big part of the community. We've been faithful customers. You have others here who could avail themselves of this. There are other community banks doing this. And what some of the bankers have told me is that even though they may have been reluctant, they have gotten involved and they did get approved. And those are happening faster now, the approval to be a lender. And they felt that was important because they were afraid that they would lose some of these long-standing relationships that they had built over the years if their faithful customers went to the other lender down the street or to another competitor, because they would be providing a very valuable service at their greatest time of need, arguably, and that they might lose one of those relationships permanently. So they had an incentive, just kind of as a good community corporate citizen and a good neighbor, to participate and to take on as much as they could to help with this. So, hopefully that's the prevailing sentiment. You might want to, maybe you can sit down and talk with them a little bit about that. If it eases their mind, you can tell them, you talked to a couple of congressmen today, and some of the headaches initially that some of the community banks were having to be approved as new SBA lenders, a lot of those kinks have been worked out over the weekend. And so it's happening much more rapidly now without the headache. So they will have benefited from waiting a little while, but maybe they still ought to do it. So,
yeah, no, that's good. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We've got time for one more. Let's go here to the Martinsburg. Pastor Chris Abel. Yes, Pastor. Trying to click on here. If there's any questions I haven't answered within an hour, I'm going to have the rule on my website, mooney.house.gov, mooney.house.gov, and you can look it up there. If there's any questions that haven't been answered, you can reach me here in Martinsburg at my district office, and that's Charleston number is 925-5964. That's the one we use, 925-5964. And Martinsburg office, if you prefer to call that, is 264-8810. 264-8810. I do think we have Pastor Chris Abel on the line now. Pastor, are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Go ahead, Pastor. You're on.
Well, once again, I thank you for taking this seriously. When I brought this up before, that we're moving forward, I very much appreciate that. I wanted to know, this Payroll Act, are we, where we haven't had a payroll in the past, we are having to hire people to handle all the calls we're getting for grief counseling, all the online church situations, the video editors. There's a lot of people. I'm looking at possibly having a $500,000 payroll for the year, and I've never had one before. And I really don't want to let these people all go as soon as this collapses, because honestly, I want to stay as moving towards an online presence. So is there a way for us to take advantage of this loan program for new hires?
Oh, that's a good one. Mike, you want to try that one?
Yeah, that's a great question, Pastor. You're not going to like my answer, I'm afraid. The only way that Congress or the SBA was able to prevent fraud. Again, I know I'm preaching to the honor choir on this call, but you can imagine a scenario where there's free government money for people to staff up, and then they suddenly, all these unscrupulous business persons go out and just hire a bunch of new staff and get the government to pay for it, right? So they had to tie it to something, and so that's why when the loan amount is being determined, that your lender is going to request the last year's payroll cost to determine that 2-month average. So it's going to be anything that happened prior to February 15th is the date, I'm afraid. Anything that was incurred before February 15th of this year. And so that probably is going to preclude the new staff and all that being covered under this program, unfortunately. I think what I'm telling you is right on that.
You qualify for the 1% loan though, right?
Well, I suspect that's true, because if it's not on those what they would call the qualified payroll expenses, if it's going forward, then I think it converts to a loan. There may still be some limitations on that. Let me give the caveat, because there are some specifications about specific categories, payroll costs, including benefits, interest on mortgage obligations, rent, utilities, that kind of stuff. So you would want to make sure on the front end that your lender fully understood what the intention was, and then get them to tell you that it's okay.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your help.
Thank you,
yes, sir.
Pastor. Thank you for taking care of the people of West Virginia. So that's going to conclude our time. I thank everyone. I particularly thank my friend Congressman Mike Johnson for taking his time and his expertise on this issue. Thank everyone for helping us get through this pandemic. It's going to be over, and we're going to come out stronger. Congressman Johnson, anything you want to end with?
Well, just to let you know, we'll be praying for all of you, and I mean that sincerely. It's not a platitude. This is 2 Chronicles 7:14 time, right? And what the thing that always sticks out to me in that admonition of Scripture is that it says that my people who are called by my name. It's not everybody. It's the church. It's us, right? And so we've got to be on our knees and encourage the rest of the church to do the same, and humbly repent before the Lord. And then He promises that He will intervene and forgive our sins and heal our land. We need a healing right now in every way. So I'll be joining you all in that prayer. And again, thanks, Alex, for the time. And I'll just reiterate what I said at the outset. You guys got a hardworking, very bright member of Congress, and I can't imagine it without him. So, Alex, keep up the good work, buddy. And anytime I can help y'all, you just let me know.
Thank you, too. God bless you and everyone on the call. See you. Bye-bye.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.